Today's episode is brought to you by Malwarebytes Premium Security. Protect your computers and devices from cyber attacks 24/7 with Malwarebytes Premium Security. And go to malwarebytes.com/lock and code for an exclusive offer. That's malwarebytes.com/lock and code.
There's a vast network of data brokers who are tracking where you go, what you buy, who you interact with, what you do online, even what you do offline. And companies are collecting so much information about us and in such covert ways that it really feels like they're listening to us.
This is Lock and Code, a Malwarebytes podcast. I'm your host, David Ruiz. Our main story today is about our phones. It has probably happened more times than you can count. You and a friend or spouse or family member are talking about something. Not texting, not emailing, not on FaceTime or on Zoom, not on Slack or Discord. You're talking face to face about an upcoming vacation or a music festival or a job offer you just got. And then, that same week, you notice some eerily specific ads. Here's one on Instagram about new carry-on luggage. Here's one on a website for earplugs. And here are 20 for laptop bags. And so you think, is my phone listening to me? This question has been around for years, and it's broken out of conspiracy theory containment. It isn't bizarre to think that a device that can and does listen to us for things like voice searches and smart assistants and phone calls, it is a phone, let's remember that same device might spy on what we say even when we're not using it. Recent news stories don't help either. In January, Apple agreed to pay $95 million to settle a lawsuit alleging that the company eavesdropped on users' conversations through its smart assistant Siri, and that it shared recordings with marketers for ad targeting. The lead plaintiff in that case had specifically claimed that she and her daughter were recorded without their consent, which resulted in them receiving multiple ads for Air Jordans. In agreeing to pay the settlement, though, Apple denied any wrongdoing, with a spokesperson telling the BBC, quote, "Siri data has never been used to build marketing profiles, and it has never been sold to anyone for any purpose," end quote. But it's hard to erase suspicions. Tech companies do lie, privacy invasions do happen, and ad targeting is extreme. Where, then, does the truth lie? Today, to help us understand the world of corporate surveillance, the ways our data is invisibly hoovered up and used against us, and of course, whether our phones are listening to us, we're speaking with Lena Cohen, staff technologist at Electronic Frontier Foundation. Lena, welcome to the show.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
We are excited to have you here. We are excited to try and answer a question that it's been around so long that it's actually kind of funny. It feels like a blind spot that we haven't covered it on Lock and Code. So let's kind of just dive right in there. And I want to start this podcast as directly as possible. I just want to ask, are our phones listening to our in-person conversations to improve ad targeting?
I get this question a lot, and I'm here to say there's no evidence that our phones are constantly eavesdropping on us through microphones for ad targeting. But what's actually happening might be scarier. There's a vast network of data brokers who are tracking where you go, what you buy, who you interact with, what you do online, even what you do offline. And companies are collecting so much information about us and in such covert ways that it really feels like they're listening to us. So even though ads aren't being targeted using data from your phone's microphone, that doesn't mean your phone isn't being used to track you. And the fact that so many people believe their phones are listening, that shows just how ubiquitous corporate surveillance has become.
We are absolutely going to dig into corporate surveillance. Surprise everyone who's listening to the show. This is a corporate surveillance episode. We've already turned the tables. But I do appreciate, like you said, there's something there to the fact that so many people think that their phone is listening to them, because that's how specific and how targeted this level of surveillance can be. But I did want to ask, as impossible as it is to sort of prove a negative, and so this is an unfair question, right? But I do have to ask, do we have quote unquote proof that our phones are not listening to us through the microphone for ad targeting?
Well, you're right that we can't prove a negative. And advertisers, they're trying to track us in every way that they can. So I'm not saying that this will or could never happen in the future, but researchers have investigated whether our phones are listening to us, and they haven't found any evidence to support that. Beyond that, modern smartphones do have some built-in protections that would make it pretty difficult for covert listening to go undetected. Both Android and iOS require user permission for microphone access, and they have a visual indicator to show when audio is being recorded. In addition to that, constant background listening would probably drain your battery pretty fast. Even though researchers haven't found evidence for this large-scale eavesdropping conspiracy, that unfortunately doesn't mean advertisers aren't using your voice data or listening in creepy but more limited ways. Smart speakers like Alexa and Google Home, they do collect your voice data when you interact with them and can use that data for ad targeting. And there's also the case of Silverpush. This is a company that made the news about 10 years ago for making an SDK for app developers that would listen for ultrasonic, inaudible to human sounds in TV commercials and use those signals to sort of link people's devices or identify if a person had heard a certain commercial. So that's definitely creepy. It's a little different from your phone listening to your conversations all the time. But there's been enough research into this topic, I think, to say that even if advertisers want to, it's not really technically feasible or practical to do this in a large scale way with no one noticing.
Look, we can't talk about something like, as you said here, the name Silverpush, that and like not dig into it, because it sounds to me like there was an idea for a company that, I don't know, that lays sound waves that will explode a dog's brain and be like, oh yeah, like it's proof that a household listen to that commercial. That sounds insane. What do we know what happened or what came of that proposal?
The FTC sent letters to app developers who were using this SDK, who were using this technology. I believe that Silverpush claimed that this wasn't being used by any apps in the US. And the controversy, obviously people found this creepy, I think caused some reputational damage. And they said they would stop eavesdropping after the FTC issued a public warning. Silverpush, the company, still exists, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're still using this technology in some form, although I wouldn't say it's the most common form of tracking these days.
Yeah. And so that actually provides a really good jumping off point here into a much bigger question, which is, you spoke about it a little bit. Smart speakers, they do obtain our voice as a way for ad targeting. But to look at the really, again, broad scope here, if our phones are not really listening to us in the way that we think they are, right? This idea of, the microphone is on, it's recording me. If that's not what is likely happening here, how else are we being surveilled?
Oh, man. In so many ways. Data brokers really take advantage of the lack of strong privacy laws in this country to track you however they can. Most websites and apps contain tracking code that expose your online activity to data brokers. And companies aren't just tracking what you do online. Credit card companies sell data about your financial transactions. Car companies sell data about your driving behavior to insurance companies and data brokers. There's even hidden Bluetooth beacons in stores that can help companies track what products you're walking by or what products you're lingering on. And all of these invasive tracking methods help data brokers build really detailed profiles about us. And advertisers buy this data. And that's why it feels like they're listening to us. Because even if it's not through our phones' microphones, they're listening to us and they're constantly surveilling us.
This thing that you mentioned here, I wanted to dive into it with Bluetooth tracking, these kind of beacons. Can you explain what's happening more there? Because that sounds deeply disturbing.
Yes, it is. Essentially, when your device connects to a Wi Fi hotspot or a Bluetooth beacon, your device sends some information to it. It might be your MAC address or some identifier for your phone, for your Bluetooth headphones. And those Bluetooth beacons and Wi Fi hotspots can listen for these signals and collect data about the devices that connect to it. They can be used to track locations within a few meters. So stores might put them throughout the aisles and collect and sell data about how many people are in different aisles and lingering more on different products. Concerts and political rallies sometimes have these. It's a pretty creepy way of collecting analytics about people.
Yeah. And so it sounds like, the way this would work in practice is, let's say I'm a store, let's say I'm Target, and I've set up a Bluetooth beacon for the different departments of my store. And so I can learn when someone doesn't really shop at my location's grocery department, but they do shop in the home goods, or they do shop in electrical, or all of a sudden they start going down the diaper aisle, and that can show, oh, okay, this person is, they have a kid, this may be the first time they have a kid. And so that reveals a lot of data of, okay, well, they're going to be buying other things for a baby and a child. And that's a lot, is all I'm saying. That's deeply disturbing. And that's just from, a form of location surveillance within a single store. Is that kind of the theory of how it works?
Yeah, and this isn't some crazy conspiracy like, is my phone listening to me? This is something that stores actually do. Macy's was in the news about 10 years ago for adding 4,000 beacon devices to their hundreds of stores around the country. Companies have a real interest in collecting detailed information, not just about whether you're going to their stores and what you're buying, but where you're going within their stores and what you're not buying.
I also wanted to talk about some of the companies here that are involved. Like, we know names like Macy's, we know Amazon and its Alexa device, and, Google smart home devices. But we've also talked tangentially here about things called data brokers. And I think that there are names for these companies that folks have never heard of before. And so I just want to give a little opportunity here to understand, okay, who else is collecting my data here? And when I say that, I mean, who are these data brokers and why have I never heard of them before?
That's a great question. You haven't heard of them because they don't want you to hear about them. Data brokers have so much information about us, but because of the lack of privacy laws in this country, we know relatively little about them. A lot of the companies collecting your data are big tech giants. Google, for example, has tracking code on approximately 80% of websites. But a lot of companies that are either directly tracking your data or harvesting your data by buying it from other companies. They're data brokers that, like you said, most of us have never heard of. The data brokers Epsilon and Lotame were recently acquired by the same advertising group that openly bragged about having profiled 90% of adult internet users. And most people
Whoa.
have never heard of these companies. And a lot of this data collection doesn't require sophisticated tracking techniques like Bluetooth beacons or inaudible ultrasonic signals. Like, companies you interact with on a daily basis can just sell your data to advertisers. Stores like Walmart and Kroger's, credit card companies like Visa and MasterCard, they have partnerships with data brokers and advertising companies. And even if they claim that they're selling your data in an anonymous, aggregated format, that doesn't really mean it can't be de-anonymized and that you can't be re-identified.
When you name companies like this, right, like Epsilon and Lotami,
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard those before in my life. I like
Yeah.
that's my only
and,
comment.
and David, those are some of the biggest ones. Like,
Yeah.
the fact that we know pretty little about this billion-dollar industry, this billion-dollar unregulated industry, is scary, because if you don't know who has your data, it's even harder to find out what they're doing with it. A lot of what we do know about data brokers comes from journalists doing resource intensive investigative projects, or from regulators who take action against some data brokers, but they don't have resources to take action against all of them. The FTC recently took action against some prominent location data brokers like Mobile Walla and Gravy Analytics. These are companies that had detailed information about our location history, and it was used to, track union organizers. It could be used to track people visiting abortion clinics. And again, these are companies that, if journalists and government agencies hadn't taken action, we wouldn't know about them.
I wanted to dig into what the data actually is, right? Because we've kind of made some references here. There's location data, but unfortunately, when we talk about data collection, it's a universe of both like category and type. And so I think it always helps to just say what is collected. And I'd love to learn, is it things like, my age, my gender, my address, my marital status, whether or not I have a mortgage? Is there anything that it isn't? Is probably actually the better question. But let's take it from the perspective of, okay, what actually is getting collected about me?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to tell you, but data brokers are collecting all of that data about you. Um, they're collecting location, demographics, device details, online activities, purchase histories, friends and family. There are data brokers that exist to help other data brokers link pieces of your identity together. There are data brokers for data brokers. And even if data brokers claim that, they're not saving your name or email, they're not selling this data in an identifiable way, that's BS. I mean, there's there's a landmark study that showed that a zip code, birthday, and gender is enough to uniquely identify the majority of Americans. And if those three data points are enough to identify you, just imagine how easily the detailed profiles that data brokers have about us could be de-anonymized. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
It's cool. It's cool when an episode is just me being like, what? But I also wanted to ask a kind of follow-up here. You said that some of the stuff they collect about us is also device info. Can you talk about that more? Do they know not only that I have an iPhone, but what model iPhone I have?
Yeah, there's a form of tracking called fingerprinting that advertisers and data brokers rely on when they can't get maybe like a stable identifier for you, like your email or a third-party cookie. They rely on device information that is automatically shared with them through normal network requests. They rely on this device information to fingerprint you, kind of the way the unique pattern on your fingerprint identifies you. The unique characteristics of your browser and device can also be used to identify you. And data brokers and advertisers are really interested in knowing, does this laptop, does this smart TV, does this computer, do they belong to the same person? They want to distinguish your laptop from your roommate's laptop. They don't always get that right. You might get targeted for ads for something that your roommate or someone on your Wi-Fi network was searching for, but they are collecting pretty detailed device information for that reason.
I think sometimes I've fallen victim to this as well when I was first learning about it. We hear that, okay, they collect device information, they collect age and gender. And in my very simplistic view, I would think, okay, so I'm getting ad targeted because I'm 36 years old and I have an iPhone. And I think, well, that's pretty rudimentary. That's not that, there's a world where I'd say that's not that invasive. Like, how much information can someone glean if they're just saying target iPhone users in San Francisco? That's the whole city. And I think what's more important is, okay, what are the inferences that these companies make based off of the data? Because I think there's a world of, okay, it's not just the data that's collected, it's like the conclusions that companies make about you based off of the data. So how do companies use this data, again, to make inferences, and how detailed can these inferences be?
That's a great question. Of course, sometimes there's a disconnect between what companies want to advertise to sell their services. Data brokers always want to say that they're using the fanciest AI to make the most precise inferences. But in practice, like, we know that data brokers are making some extremely specific inferences. A lot of data brokers sell something called audience segments to advertisers. These will be like lists of people that fall into certain categories that advertisers want to target. And some actual audience segments that I've come across include people with HIV and AIDS, people with alcoholism, people who work at the Pentagon, restaurant visitor during COVID quarantine, people who attended this specific Black Lives Matter protest. Like, as you can imagine, these lists can facilitate some pretty dangerous or predatory ad targeting. One more example of like a specific inference that can be made based on the detailed data they have is Mobile Walla, the location data broker I mentioned that the FTC took action against recently. The FTC complaint against them mentioned that they helped a client create sort of a geofence around the home addresses of the employees of their competitor, to help their client poach nurses from like a competing health center. So this isn't always like a high level national list of this people with a specific trait. Like there can be custom lists generated for really like specific purposes.
Wow. Again, going through that category that you had, just some of the examples, particularly, folks who visited restaurants, during COVID lockdowns, whatever the insinuation is, right? Whatever the company is that's like saying, we want this for X reason, it's a bad insinuation. I don't think it's a good one.
Yeah.
I don't,
Yeah.
I don't really care at a certain point beyond, whoa, well, you have a very weird view of your
Yeah.
customers.
Yeah. And I'm glad that's your takeaway, because I also want to mention that, like, despite all of the data these companies are collecting, a lot of their inferences can be wrong. And a lot of data brokers just want to collect all this data to sell their services, but are really overstating like how much they know, even despite all the tracking they do. And that's why sometimes we get ridiculously incorrect targeted ads. The incorrect inferences can have consequences too. For example, I think it was someone complained to a government agency in Connecticut about, it was like a patient who just finished chemotherapy kept on being targeted for cremation service ads. So like targeted ads can have a really upsetting impact on people when such personal information about us is misused.
Let's get into that immediately, right? Because that's such a wild example I hadn't heard of before. There are people and many studies that say that people like targeted ads. I doubt the studies. I'm just going to put that out right now because
Yeah.
the methodology is always, it's not do you like it, it's do you prefer this compared to other ads. And
Hmm.
I don't think that's not the same question, right? But for
Hmm.
the folks out there who, let's say they do. Let's say, hey, I prefer targeted ads or I wholesale like them. I think they're good. For that group of individuals who does exist, right? What is the harm here then in targeted advertising?
Creepy targeted ads, they're just the most visible part of this ecosystem of corporate surveillance. And the infrastructure that exists to serve targeted ads also facilitates the sale of our sensitive information to anyone willing to pay, not just advertisers. Each time you see a targeted ad, your personal information is being exposed to sometimes thousands of advertisers and data brokers in real time through this process called real time bidding. And that system allows data brokers to collect information at a really, really staggering scale with basically no oversight. And this has consequences. I mean, for example, fraudsters have purchased data to identify elderly people susceptible to scams. Data brokers have helped predatory companies target people in financial distress. And in this surveillance infrastructure, it also facilitates government surveillance. Government agencies and law enforcement can purchase people's location data and web browsing records without a warrant by just going to a data broker. And then other companies will repackage that data into government spy tools. So, yeah, I could go on and on about the danger of ad targeting. It's more than creepy. But I also want to add that advertising doesn't have to be this way. Like, advertising in and of itself isn't evil, and it's an important thing for businesses to sustain themselves. But ads can be targeted contextually based on, say, the content of the page people are on without exposing this much personal data.
I'm glad you brought up here just pretty plainly, like you said, advertising isn't evil, because I think sometimes, we talk about these things, we talk about targeted advertising, and I think, unfortunately, I think through our own fault, some of the takeaways are those people just hate ads, like, oh, they just hate ads. They don't understand how commerce happens. They don't understand how the internet, is held
Yeah.
up through advertising. And it isn't that. It's that the agreement that we had beforehand, in how we receive advertising has been completely shattered. And it is now it is a one-sided agreement that entirely leverages who we are to make money off of us. Like there's no say that we really have in it. You talked a little bit here about contextual advertising. Just help me understand, what is that? How does it work?
So, contextual advertising is an alternative to the current, like, dominant but dangerous model of online behavioral advertising. In online behavioral advertising, ads are targeted based on your online and offline behavior, like information about you, the person seeing the ad. With contextual advertising, the ad is targeted based on where it's placed. I mean, this is easy to understand in the context of like a newspaper. The sports section might feature ads for sporting events and sporting equipment.
Yeah.
But, on the internet, like contextual ads might mean, you're visiting an article about fishing, you get ads about fishing gear. It also, a plumber in Chicago probably wouldn't want to send ads to someone in New York. So contextual advertising also could entail like high level coarse location targeting without the current status quo, which is advertisers trying to suck up data about our precise location down to the meter down to where we are within a store. It's an alternative model of advertising that gets the job done without sacrificing our privacy and taking away our control over our sensitive information.
Yeah, I always think of it as like, I watch Jeopardy, and the other people who watch Jeopardy are twice my age, according to the ads, because
Yeah.
all of the ads are for medications. As people start aging, some of them feel a little scam-like, like things
Yeah.
to improve your brain health. And I was like, I don't know if that should just be
Yeah.
sold in a over the counter. Um, but
Yeah.
that's what it is, right? They know that the audience skews upwards, and so there are ads for essentially things that are important to folks who are aging. And I don't get mad at them, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
I don't see the ads and go, oh man, I really wish these were better ads. I don't have to be entertained every 30 seconds of my life. But anyways, that's a different podcast.
Yeah. I also just want to add one thing that a lot of people are like, oh, but this is going to hurt newspapers and, like online businesses that really rely on advertising revenue. Like,
Mhm.
if we can't target ads in this way. But the infrastructure that exists for this highly targeted advertising doesn't necessarily help these businesses either. There's a case against Google ads right now for being a monopoly and for taking advantage of their dominance in the online advertising world to take advertising dollars away from, online sites and newspapers. So if we simplify the advertising system, that might actually mean that more advertising revenue can go to the people selling ad space and not to all of these surveillance intermediaries that take a cut of their ad profits.
I do also enjoy these moments where we see that, the momentum's been going this way forever, and it feels like it's a very entrenched system, and it sort of is like proving itself, through like this very circular logic, like, oh, well, it's here, so it works. And when we take a moment to step back, there are holes, that's it. Like,
Yeah.
oh no,
Yeah.
it helps the company that's the biggest already. Like, oh, what a surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I wanted to close out here with what folks can do to protect themselves. And it sounds kind of difficult because we're in this world where even if you've never typed out the words like, hey, I am this religion, like that's not on a Facebook post,
Yeah.
it's not on Instagram. Companies can see that you visit this church every week. And so
Exactly. Yeah.
therefore, you are that religion, and that's stored
Yeah.
somewhere. Then someone's making money off of it because they want to target people with ads who are Catholic or Methodist. And when we think of that, it starts to become a little overwhelming as to, okay, well, then what can I do? But it's also important. What can folks do at home to stay private?
Yeah. I mean, like you mentioned, corporate surveillance it's hard to avoid entirely, but that doesn't mean you should give up on your privacy. There are small changes that you can take that can cut back on the amount of data that companies can collect and share about you. On your computer, you can install EFF's tracker blocking extension, Privacy Badger, in your web browser. This blocks tracking code in websites. You can also switch to a browser like Brave. It has more aggressive anti-tracking features than most other browsers. On your phone, I highly recommend disabling your advertising ID. This is like third-party cookies for apps. And luckily, Android and iPhones let you turn that advertising ID off. You can also audit your permissions to make sure you're not, say, sharing location or microphone data unnecessarily with apps that don't need it. EFF does have guides for doing this on our surveillance self-defense website. There's guides produced by EFF and other organizations like Consumer Reports about limiting tracking from cars and smart TVs and smart speakers and social media platforms. There's even more intense things you can do, like only using cache, using the Tor browser. But truly, like, the burden shouldn't be on you. The burden should not be on individuals to take all of these steps to protect their information. Like, I want to live in a world where my data is private by default without me having to install a browser extension. And the most effective way to do that would be to protect our data would be to pass strong federal privacy laws, to ban online behavioral advertising, and to make sure that the privacy laws we do have are enforced. One thing that a lot of privacy laws are missing is a private right of action. That means that anyone can sue companies that violate their privacy rights, not just certain government agencies. And that's important for privacy laws to be enforced because government agencies usually don't have the resources to enforce privacy laws at the scale and at the rate that they're being broken across the internet. One last tip is just that it's important not to give up on privacy and to see it as this like individual effort that you need to go off the grid to accomplish. EFF likes to say that privacy is a team sport. So before you go down the rabbit hole of these, maybe high effort technical ways to completely protect all of your data, start by talking to your friends and family about the simple, easy steps they can take to protect their data. The more people that take action to protect their privacy or to protect some of their data, the more will disrupt the corporate surveillance industry.
The steps you were given, it's fun to hear these, right? Because, we care about these things at Malwarebytes. I care about them just as a person, right? And just going down them like, oh yeah, of course, Privacy Badger. We have one at Malwarebytes, Malwarebytes Browser Guard. I'm like, yep, Brave. I was like, oh yeah, I use Brave. And then like disabling and all these saying, yep, check. And then when you said, hey, just start using cache, and I was like, oh, that's new. That's love that.
Yeah, the list goes on.
Right, and it is a fun moment to show how I'd say like how far privacy goes into real life, right? Because I think 50 years ago, if you said something like, oh, wow, you should use cache because it's really private, I think people would have been like, what are you talking about? What does that even mean? None of this makes sense.
Yeah.
But it does go to show, again, how deep this goes and how broadly privacy is applied now and how broadly we're invaded, in so many different spheres. And so it's just it's a fun little teaching moment is all. I think that's great. And it's also wild, again, going back a little bit, like you said, this thing here, a private right of action. It's wild. I think most people don't know this, that we don't have the right to sue companies for this. One would assume like, okay, well, a company wronged me. Therefore, one of the paths towards correcting the mistake is to sue the company. And when it comes to data privacy violations, no. That's you'd be wrong. You can't do that. It's because the laws are being written that way that favor the companies. And that's the world we live in. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, EFF is always advocating for a strong federal privacy law. But because of how much influence data brokers and the surveillance industry has through lobbying, like, some proposals for a federal privacy law would preempt stronger state laws. Like, they would set a ceiling, not the floor, for privacy protections. So it's important that we don't just, demand privacy laws, but we demand strong privacy laws that can be enforced, and privacy laws that are not being written by the companies who are trying to surveil us.
Lena, I just wanted to thank you again for coming on today's show and for talking about how, despite the fact that it feels like our phones are listening to us through the microphone, there is no proof of that. However, our phones are metaphorically listening to us in many, many other ways because they are devices for that. So again, thank you again so much for coming on today's show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
To our listeners, we'll talk to you again in 2 weeks. Until then, stay tuned and stay safe. And remember, You can read all our cybersecurity coverage on Malwarebytes Labs at malwarebytes.com/blog. Finally, our intro music is by Kevin MacLeod from incompetech.com, and our outro music is by Woa from unminus.com. Today's show has been edited by our podcast consultant, Eric Johnson, at lightningpod.fm. Thank you, folks.